Namo Buddhaya. Good evening and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV. I am Shawnee Yanvanich from Bangkok, Thailand. Our program begins today invoking the blessings for the Chinese and Vietnamese New Year. Millions of people around the world of the globe celebrate this event with pomp and pageantry. This week-long celebration begins today. Here are a group of Buddhist monastics at the Poksan Monastery in Ho Chi Minh City, paying their homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha in preparation of the event. That falls on February 10th today. We wish passionately our Chinese and Vietnamese brothers and sisters a Happy New Year. Sadhu, fantastic chanting. Now here's Most Venerable Dr. Piku Podi to deliver the first part of the sermon on the topic of the sequential training.
And we will start the program. Okay, but I'm going to be sharing the screen. But first, let's begin then with the homage to the Buddha. So we join the palms together and we go Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. That's homage to the Blessed One, to the Worthy One, to the Fully Enlightened One. Okay, I'm going to be sharing the screen. First, I want to close some. Okay. And so now we've been giving a series of talks on what they call the paths to liberation in early Buddhism. Yeah, so in the last month, I gave the talk on the Noble Eightfold Path. And now we come to a particular pattern or presentation of the path, which I call the sequential training. In Pali, Anupubasika, the gradual or sequential training. Yeah, so the word Anupuba means in sequence, and Sika means training. And we find this particular presentation of the path in a large number of suttas, especially in the Digha Nikaya, a longer version, and in the Majjhima Nikaya, a shorter version. And so this is a very comprehensive presentation of the path. So to treat it adequately we're going to be spreading it out over 3 sessions. So you can see we have the first class. This will be today's class. We'll cover the early stages. And then in the second class, this will be June, July. In July, we'll cover the middle stages of the training. And in the third class, that will be in August, then we'll cover the final stages of the training. And we'll be basing this presentation on the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 27. But as I said, we also find versions of the same sequential training in several suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. Okay, the sutta opens with a little background story, which I won't relate the background story in detail, but I'll just give a summary. And the background story is interesting because it shows the Buddha's approach to acquiring knowledge. Yeah, so there's a certain Brahmin named Janusoni who thinks that the Buddha he draws the conclusion that the Buddha is an enlightened one because he sees many people converting to becoming followers of the Buddha. And the Buddha he tells the Brahmin, that's not a correct basis for drawing the conclusion that I am the fully enlightened Buddha. And then he gives the example of an elephant hunter who enters into the forest seeking a bull elephant. And when he sees these signs of the elephant in the forest, he doesn't come to the conclusion that that is the sign of a big bull elephant, because there can be other kinds of elephants that leave the same signs behind. So it's only when the elephant hunter actually sees the bull elephant in the forest that he can correctly conclude that is a big bull elephant. And now the Buddha is going to apply this simile to the case of how one draws the conclusion that the ascetic Gautama, that we call the Buddha, is in fact a fully enlightened Buddha. And he does this by presenting this sequential training, because it's when you follow the sequential training to the end, and then you see the truth that the Buddha saw, that you can conclude that the Buddha is a fully enlightened one. Okay, so let us now look at the sequential training. So we start off with, I've blocked off the different sections and I've given them my own titles. And so the first section I call the conditions for the sequential training to be proclaimed in the world. And so here the Buddha starts off by saying that first is that a Tathagata appears in the world. The word Tathagata is a special designation for the Buddha. Yes, so that we have among the conditions here. You see the first is the arising of a Buddha in the world. And then the second condition is that the Buddha teaches the Dharma. And then we have this description of the Dhamma as good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. And it has the proper meaning, and it's expressed properly, so it has good phrasing, good wording. And then as part of the Dhamma, the Buddha reveals the holy life. This is the practice of the path, which is said to be utterly perfect and pure. Yeah, so that is condition number 2 that we have here, the teaching of the Dharma. Okay, then we come to the third condition, and that is that the person listening to the Dharma, who hears that Dharma, acquires faith in the Tathagata. Of course, if once you acquire faith in the Tathagata, it doesn't mean that you necessarily become a monastic, since there are many lay followers who become sincere practitioners of the Dhamma. But in this sutta, the Buddha wants to show the complete path from beginning to end. And the Buddha established the monastic life to provide the best conditions for following the path to the end. And so here we have the case of the person who listens, who hears the Dhamma and gains faith in the Tathagata, in the Buddha, then considers that household life has many obstacles, whereas the life of renunciation provides the best conditions for following the path. And so here we have the person who gives up his or her wealth, gives up the relatives, shaves the head, and then puts on the yellow robe, the ochre robe, and goes forth from the home life into homelessness. And so we could say that now we've reached a point where we've completed all 4 of the conditions for the sequential training. And so those end with the going forth into the homeless life. And now we come to the second major grouping, which is the undertaking of the training in sila, in virtuous conduct. And so I've divided the training, this is the ethical training, I've divided it first into the major principles of the moral training. And you could see that these are major principles are very similar to those observed also by the lay disciples. And so first one abstains from killing other living beings, and instead one dwells with compassion towards all living beings. And then the second is that one abstains from taking what is not given or stealing, and instead one follows honesty. Yes, with the third principle, a difference comes between the monastic and the lay follower. The lay follower observes the precept of abstaining from misconduct in regard to sexual matters, but the monastic has to observe complete celibacy or abstinence from sexual behavior. Yeah, so these 3 principles of right action. And then we have 4 principles of right speech, abstaining from false speech or lying. And then one abstains from divisive speech, speech that creates conflict and hostility between people. And instead one speaks words that are intended to promote harmony and friendship between people. And then one gives up harsh speech or angry speech, and instead one's speech should be gentle and pleasing to listen to. And then one gives up idle chatter or gossip, and one has to be moderate in one's speech. And so it said that one's words should be worth recording, even in an age before there were tape recorders. Okay, so those are the principles of right speech. And then we have all these the minor ethical observances. Yeah, we won't go into these in detail. Yeah, you can read them on your own. I think we made them available for everybody. Yeah, so these minor principles are not really, I say that they're not really ethical as such in the sense of being concerned with morality, but rather concerned with sort of refraining from luxury and indulgence, self-indulgence. Okay, the third principle here under what I call the ethical training, so again, it's not really ethical or moral as such, is contentment. And this implies that one leads a life of simplicity. And so the text says that the monastic becomes content with robes to cover the body and with alms food to maintain his stomach or to maintain his life. So wherever one goes, ideally, all one takes with one are one's 3 robes and an alms bowl to collect one's alms food. And this is compared to a bird. So a bird, wherever it goes, it flies, taking along only its 2 wings. So we have we have here the birds in New York. In the wintertime, they'll go south to Florida. And in the summer, they might go north to Canada. And the bird doesn't have to pack 3 or 4 suitcases. It doesn't have to take along a cell phone or a computer. When the weather gets a little bit cold, the bird thinks time to go to Florida, and then it just flies down. When the weather starts to get a little hot in the summer, again, the bird doesn't have to pack its suitcases to go to Canada, but it just flies with its wings. Yeah, so this is the ideal for the monk, is to go with only the extra robe and with the bowl to collect the food. Yeah, sadly, many of us fail to live up to that high standard, but we always have this in mind that this is the ideal that we should be following. Okay, then the text sort of summarizes this or concludes this session on it's called the aggregate of noble virtue or ethical conduct. It says that when you possess this aggregate of noble virtue, you experience within yourself a blameless bliss. Because you feel a kind of inner happiness because you know you're not doing anything wrong, anything harmful to others. And you feel this happiness that comes from living a life of simplicity and contentment. Okay, so this then takes care of the training in, we say the training in Sila, in the ethical training. Okay, and now with the next major heading, the training becomes more internal. Yeah, now we are moving in the direction of starting to train the mind. And this begins with the restraint of the sense faculties. And this training of the sense faculties is very important because it's through the contact of the senses that the defilements arise and start to grow, the mental defilements. Okay, so the text says that on seeing a form, a visible object with the eye, the monk does not grasp at its signs and features. Okay, so we have these two terms, two words here. In Pali, one is nimitta, which I translate sign. The other is anubhyanjana, which I translate as the features. Yeah, what's called the nimitta or sign is maybe the general feature of the object. And what is called anubhyanjana or features, these are the detailed features of the object. Okay, so to give an example, so especially for a monk, the most important task is to restrain the arising of sensual desire or sexual desire. So let us say we have a young monk, maybe a young monk in his early 20s, and every day he goes on his alms round to collect his food. And often there will come out a young woman, maybe 17 or 18 years old, to offer food to the monk. So if he doesn't have restraint of the sense faculties, when he looks up, he sees that young woman. So he grasps the sign, ah, a beautiful young woman. Yeah, so that is grasping the nimitta, the general appearance, a beautiful young woman. Okay, and then grasping the features means that this young monk now starts looking at the specific details of the young woman's appearance. Beautiful hair, nice smile, nice figure. So if you see something that you don't like, first you focus on the general appearance, something disagreeable. And then the mind starts focusing on the specific features that make that object disagreeable. So this is why in the next sentence, the text says, if he left the eye faculty unguarded, I think evil is too strong, let's say, bad, unwholesome states of craving and displeasure might invade the mind. So if you let the sense faculties dwell on pleasant objects, then craving arises. If you let the mind dwell on disagreeable objects, then displeasure arises. And so to prevent this, one has to guard the sense faculties and undertake the restraint of the sense faculties. And this really means, though it speaks about guarding the eye faculty, but it really means guarding the mind with mindfulness. So we can't avoid seeing visible objects or hearing sounds. If when we eat food, we'll taste the flavor. So those things can't be avoided. But what we have to do really is to use mindfulness in order to prevent the mind from grasping the signs and features of the objects. Okay, so this applies, as you could see, to each of the sense faculties. So we have the sound, you hear sounds with the ear, you smell odors with the nose, taste flavors with the tongue, and touch tangible objects with the body. Okay, so the first five deal with the five physical sense faculties. And then the sixth is the mind faculty, which has its own type of object, which are called, the Pali word actually is Dhamma, but here it's translated mind objects. Yeah, so this could include all sorts of mental objects like ideas, mental images, thoughts, emotional states, and so on. Yeah, so naturally we will see forms with the eye and so on, and we will think of objects with the mind. So that's quite natural functioning. But what we have to avoid in training is not to grasp upon the appearances of the object, the agreeable and disagreeable appearances. Okay, and then the text describes the effect or the result of practicing this restraint of the sense faculties is that one experiences within a bliss that is unblemished, untainted. Yeah, you could notice a difference here when you're following the ethical training, then you experience the bliss that is blameless because your conduct can't be blamed by others. Okay, but when you practice this restraint of the sense faculties, then you experience the bliss that is unblemished. And the reason this bliss is said to be unblemished is that the mind is now getting gradually free from craving and displeasure, or craving and aversion. Maybe aversion is better. Okay, so this takes care of the third step here. This is restraint of the sense faculties. Okay, now we come to the fourth major stage in the sequential training, and this is called, the Pali word is sampajanya, which I've translated here as clear comprehension. Okay, so the word sampajanya, there have been different translators render the word in different ways, but you could see that the base of the word is the verb janati, which means to know. And it has two prefixes. One is sam and the other is pa. Yeah, if we take just one prefix, we have the verb pujanati. And it's from this verb pujanati that we get the noun panya, which we usually translate wisdom. So this practice of clear comprehension is, we could say, it's the seed from which panya or wisdom will arise. Yeah, but sampajanya is not quite the same as panya or wisdom. Yeah, the way I understand sampajanya, it means whatever you are doing, you clearly know what you are doing. And maybe you think, as long as I'm awake, whatever I'm doing, I know what I'm doing. But that's not really the case. When we are doing something, usually our mind is roaming and wandering to other things. So when you practice sampajanya, this means that whatever you are doing, you are clearly aware, you know clearly what you are doing. Yeah, the mind is focused on the activity itself, and you know that you are engaged in that activity. Yeah, often we find the practice of sampajanya is associated with sati, or mindfulness. So we have the two together, mindfulness and sampajanya. So often we face the question, how do we distinguish mindfulness and clear comprehension? Yeah, the difference between them is very subtle and sometimes difficult to explain, but I will try my best. So let me try first. I'll say that sati, mindfulness, means that when you are doing something, your mind is focused on that activity. And through clear comprehension, one knows that one is engaged in that activity. Let's take the example of walking. So when you are walking through mindfulness, your mind is established in the body, or your mind is established upon the activity of walking with the body. And the mind, as you're walking, the mind is not running away to other objects. So that is sati, or mindfulness. And through clear comprehension, when you're walking, you know, I am walking. And maybe to make the clear comprehension, to make it more precise, you could be observing when you're taking the right step, you know I'm taking the right step. When you're taking the left step, you know I'm taking the left step. Okay, to give another example, let us say one is eating, let's say, eating an apple. So it is mindfulness that keeps the taste of the apple present before the mind. So when you're tasting something, the apple, your mind is not running away to other objects. And through clear comprehension, you know that you are eating. Yeah, so this is my best attempt to try to explain the distinction. But if my explanations are not clear, just recognize that because mindfulness and clear comprehension, the difference between them is very slight. Okay, so let us now look at the text of the sutta to see how it explains sampajanya. Okay, so it explains the application of sampajanya, of clear comprehension, to various activities of everyday life. So it says that one acts in clear comprehension when going forward and coming back, when looking ahead and then looking to the side. Let's see, when you apply clear comprehension, when you're bending and stretching the limbs. And let's say when you could say that you apply clear comprehension when you're getting dressed. Yeah, you apply clear comprehension when you're eating, drinking, tasting. Yeah, and then where you apply clear comprehension even when going to the toilet. And then you apply clear comprehension in all of the minor postures, walking, standing, sitting, lying down before going to sleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. Okay, now the commentaries to the Pali Canon try to clarify the meaning of clear comprehension by analyzing it into four aspects or four kinds of clear comprehension. And so that might help us to get some understanding of what's meant by clear comprehension. Okay, so the first is what's called the clear comprehension of one's purpose. So this means before you undertake any action, you determine with your mind, what is the purpose in undertaking this action? And then when you determine the purpose, you have to sort of inquire and ask yourself, is the purpose really beneficial? That is it beneficial in terms of the Dharma? Like in undertaking this action, is it going to help me to grow in the Dharma or to become an obstacle to my progress in the Dharma? Okay, then the second aspect of clear comprehension is clear comprehension of the means of achieving one's purpose. Is the means that I'm going to use to gain this particular, to fulfill this purpose, are those means in accordance with the Dharma? Yeah, and these two aspects of clear comprehension are very, very useful in our everyday life, because so often we engage in actions without thinking about whether they're going to really help us to grow morally and spiritually. And so I have the sort of the intention of controlling my speech. And then if somebody is irritating me, annoying me, without any thought, then I just start speaking angrily to that person. Shut up. But when I start to get angry, if I use clear comprehension, then I realize it would not be beneficial for me to speak angrily to that person. If I speak angrily to that person, it's just going to create hostility between us. And it means I'm losing control over my own mind. Okay, then, for example, I might need something, some particular object. And then maybe if I think I can get that object easily by cheating, that would be harmful to me. And so if you have the clear comprehension of the means or method, say the method, then to achieve your goals, you'll use only honest and wholesome methods. Okay, then the third type of clear comprehension is clear comprehension of the meditation object. And this is the way this is explained in the commentary. It means that when the monastic or the meditator engages in any other activity apart from the actual meditation, they still keep the meditation object in mind. Or if they're engaged in any other activity apart from sitting in formal meditation, they still use that activity as a way of practicing meditation. For example, at many monasteries, particularly in South Asia, there'll be a time of day when all of the monks have to sweep the grounds of the monastery. And so you don't think, okay, now I'm sweeping the grounds, so I just drop my meditation. But when you're sweeping, you do it with mindfulness and with clear comprehension. So that makes even the sweeping a kind of meditation. And say when the monks go for their alms round, they do the walking with mindfulness and clear comprehension. Yeah, and so this makes all the activities of everyday life into types of meditation. Okay, then the fourth type of clear comprehension, this is clear comprehension as insight. Yeah, so this is where clear comprehension is starting to turn into wisdom. So in this case, whatever activity one is engaged in, one starts to examine that activity by way of the characteristics of impermanence and non-self. Yeah, but this is a more advanced stage of clear comprehension, so I won't go into details here. So now we could just do a quick overview of what we've covered so far in the stages of the gradual training. So we start off with the conditions for the sequential training. We see the arising of the Buddha in the world, the teaching of the Dharma, and then the disciple acquires faith, and goes forth into the homeless life. And then having gone forth into the homeless life, the disciple, who's now a monk or a nun, now observes the virtuous conduct or sila of a monastic. So they observe the major precepts as well as the minor regulations for the monastic person. And then they remain content with the simple material supports, robes, alms food, a dwelling place, and so forth. And then to prevent the arising of craving and aversion, one practices restraint of the sense faculties. And then to deepen the, call this the meditative mind, or to strengthen the meditative mind, one practices mindfulness and clear comprehension in all activities. Okay, I think now we can devote this a little time to taking some questions. And I want to ask my own regular English students to please let the Russian-speaking students take priority in asking questions.
Mhm. So there is a question in chat to me. Oleg, do you have the link for the Russian English video of the last month? Yes, I have the Russian English version and only English version and only Russian version, 3 video separately.
Okay, so the way people can ask questions, you could use the hand symbol in the participant. It will be on the bottom of the, I think, the participant box, or you could send them the questions to Oleg. Okay, so I see one question in the participant box with the hand. This is Lee Halfpenny.
Yeah, thanks, Bante. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I could hear clearly.
Yeah. I had 2 questions, if you don't mind. One is fairly just an observation on clear comprehension. I wonder if the recent science, not so recent, but since the Sutta has been written, taking left brain, right brain into consideration, into clear comprehension, I think might be a helpful way of looking at that we're always, from a right brain standpoint, we're always aware, but we're not necessarily aware that we're aware. So then applying left brain to the left brain understanding or attention to the right brain awareness that's always there might be a helpful commentary on clear comprehension.
Yeah, possibly, but I don't have the expertise in that area to say anything.
Right. There's a really good book called A Stroke of Insight written by.
I saw her video. Yeah.
Yeah. The other question I had was in terms of a monastic. Sexual desire is certainly a powerful thing that's hard to control, especially for a young monk.
Yeah.
And I understand that in the Vinaya, it talks about attacking oneself with her hand or something like that in terms of masturbation.
Yeah.
If a monk is not able to refrain from that after trying to do it for a long time, do they need to disrobe?
Okay, so masturbation is not a ground for expulsion from the Sangha. It's not a ground for losing one's status as a monk. What causes loss of status there are 4 heavy offenses, and the one relevant here is engaging in sexual intercourse. Yeah, but masturbation, it's a heavy offense, which requires a rather complicated process to be rehabilitated as a monk. But if a monk finds that they can't really control their sexual desire, then they'll face the choice whether they should disrobe or not. But the masturbation itself doesn't require that the person leave the monastic life. Okay, I'll move on to the next question I see with the hand symbol. This would be Alison. Is it pronounced Granha?
Thanks, Mats.
Okay.
I would like to know, I already listened a explication about Sampajana that means introspection. And for example, when I pay attention in the breath, what knows that I'm distracted and come back to breath, it was the Sampajana. It's correct, this explanation?
Yeah, I would say in that case, it's Sampajanya that knows when the mind has wandered from the object, that recognizes the mind has wandered. Yeah, and that also Sampajanya when the mind is consistently on the object. Through Sampajanya, you will know that the mind is on the object. Yeah, that was as a function of Sampajanya. Yeah, that's a good way to take it. Yeah. Okay, that's the next question will be from Samantha Jayatilaka.
Thank you, Bhante. Yeah, thank you, Bhante, for explaining clearly the difference between sati and sampajana. I think I finally understand it now, because every time before, someone has always said it included wisdom. So now I'm just wondering, I've also heard that term yoniso manasikara, wise attention, I believe, or something like that. So where does that come into it, Bhante? What is that relevant to the sati and sati sampajana?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I've always wondered about that because they seem to be used. It seems that there's a lot of correspondence. Yeah, so it seems to me that there are close correspondences between yoniso manasikara, which is like wise reflection, and this fourth aspect of clear comprehension, the clear comprehension that gives rise to wisdom. But I've never seen either the suttas or the commentary identify the two. Yeah, so it remains something of an open question. What exactly is the relationship between the two? A good topic for a PhD student in Buddhism to do a PhD dissertation. Okay, I could take one more question, and this will be from Lee Mi-hong. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. And you translate Sampajana as like clear comprehension, but Goenka translates like constant through understanding of impermanence. So it's like anicca. So we are doing sati with with the understanding of anicca. This is what Goenkaji he explained. I think he doesn't like the translating like a clear comprehension.
Yeah,
That's why it makes me very confusing. That's why.
Yeah, I don't agree with Goenka about that.
Oh,
point.
you don't agree? Oh.
No, we could say that when you come to this fourth kind of clear comprehension in the commentaries, this will include like seeing into impermanence or examining things in terms of impermanence. But in this passage, in the sutta, we didn't translate the question.
Okay.
Okay, but let me just finish. Okay, in the sutta, when the way we speak about clear comprehension and all these activities, it's not indicating that here one is examining these activities by way of impermanence. Yeah, it seems to me that Goenka takes a very narrow interpretation of clear comprehension based on his system of meditation. Okay, I see one more hand, so I'll take this one more question, and that will have to be the last one.
Thank you, Bhante, for taking my question. I have two questions.
Choose the more important one.
One then. So my question is about clear comprehension. So when your perception, so when you're interacting with something and you perceive something, I thought that there are three ways you can interact with it. Either you like it, dislike it, or neutral.
Yeah.
So if one of those three arise, then what do you do with them? And is one correct, or are all them wrong, or what are those three reactions supposed to be considered?
Oh, that's such a big question. Yeah, it's such a big question that I just have to pass it over it for now. Yeah. What is your second question? Maybe that's simpler.
I wasn't clear comprehended, so I forgot already.
Oh, okay. I just say in regard to the first question that you really have to determine the response based on the circumstances. Okay, I think we're going to have to end because I'll have to go up for the meal now. And so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so I'll recite the verses in Pali for sharing the merits. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirangra kantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirangra kantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirangra kantu mang parang dukkha pata chani dukkha baya pata chani baya soka pata chani soka pantu sabbepi panino. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining, and thank you to Oleg for the translation. And please join us. The next class will be in July. I don't recall the exact date.
July the 22nd, Bhante.
Is it the 22nd? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so we will be continuing with this sutta in July.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu. Yeah, Bhante, bow to Bhante Bodhi.
We plan to post 1 or 2 Jataka stories every week. They are about the previous lives of the Buddha during his existence in both human and non-human forms. Jatakas are an important part of Buddhist art and literature. Here is another Jataka story that we like very much to watch.
Chata Chado. ณ เมืองสาวัตถีครอบครัวของเศรษฐีผู้หนึ่งนามว่าอนาถบิณฑิกะเศรษฐีได้เกิดเรื่องวุ่นวายขึ้นหลังจากรับสะใภ้ที่เป็นลูกสาวของตระกูลใหญ่เข้ามาอยู่ในบ้านสะใภ้ที่ว่านี้ก็คือนางสุชาดาผู้เป็นน้องสาวของนางวิสาขาสะใภ้ผู้นี้สำคัญตนว่าเป็นลูกสาวของตระกูลใหญ่จึงไม่ยอมก้มหัวให้กับใครเลยในครอบครัวสามีเที่ยวดุด่าเคี่ยนตีทาสรับใช้ในเรือนของสามีอยู่เป็นประจำ
ทาสอย่างพวกแกเนี่ยไม่มีวันได้ดิบได้ดีขึ้นมาได้หรอกแค่สั่งให้ทำงานง่ายๆแค่นี้ก็ทำไม่ได้โอ๊ยเบื่อจริงๆเลยคนบ้านเนี้ย
แม้กระทั่งปู่และย่าผู้อาวุโสที่สุดในบ้านนางสุชาดาก็ไม่ได้ให้ความเคารพแต่อย่างใด
คุณปู่คุณย่าอยากได้ของอะไรก็เรียกให้เด็กรับใช้มาหยิบให้สิคะหนูเองไม่ว่างที่จะมาคอยทำอะไรให้หรอกค่ะเหนื่อยจะตายใครจะไปทำแค่เดินไปเดินมาในบ้านเนี่ยก็เมื่อยพออยู่แล้วยังให้ทำงานอีกก็คงจะไม่ไหว
วันหนึ่งพระพุทธเจ้าพร้อมด้วยพระภิกษุสงฆ์เข้าไปฉันที่บ้านของท่านอนาถบิณฑิกะเศรษฐี ขณะที่กำลังแสดงธรรมอยู่ก็ได้ยินเสียงเอะอะโวยวาย
ทำไมพวกเจ้าถึงได้งี่เง่าอย่างนี้ฉันบอกแล้วใช่ไหมว่าฉันไม่ชอบกินผลไม้พวกนี้ไปหาของที่ดีกว่านี้มาให้ฉันไป
เสียงเอะอะโวยวายอะไรหรือ
เสียงลูกสะใภ้ของหม่อมฉันเองพระเจ้าค่ะ
เมื่อเศรษฐีกราบทูลเรื่องทั้งหมดให้ทราบพระองค์จึงรับสั่งให้เรียกนางมาเข้าเฝ้าสุชาดาเขาว่าภรรยาน่ะมี7แบบเจ้าน่ะเป็นแบบไหน
หม่อมฉันไม่เข้าใจเพคะขอพระองค์ทรงโปรดอธิบายด้วยเพคะ
พระพุทธเจ้าได้ตรัสแสดงเรื่องภรรยาทั้ง7จำพวกว่าภรรยาแบบที่1มีจิตคิดประทุษร้ายสามีมิได้ประพฤติสิ่งที่เป็นประโยชน์เกื้อกูลแก่สามีรักใคร่ในชายอื่นดูหมิ่นล่วงเกินสามีหาเรื่องทำลายสามีเรียกภรรยาแบบนี้ว่าวัฏกาภริยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนกับเพชฌฆาตภรรยาแบบที่2สามีได้ทรัพย์มามอบให้ภรรยาเก็บรักษาไว้แต่ภรรยาไม่รู้จักเก็บรักษามีแต่จะใช้ทรัพย์นั้นให้หมดไปเรียกว่าโจรีภริยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนกับโจรภรรยาแบบที่3เกียจคร้านทำงานกินจุมักโกรธมักดุด่ากดขี่คนใช้เรียกว่าไอยาภริยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนกับเจ้านายภรรยาแบบที่4อบอ้อมอารีทำแต่สิ่งที่เป็นประโยชน์เกื้อกูลทุกเมื่อตามรักษาสามีเหมือนแม่รักษาลูกรักษาทรัพย์ที่สามีหามาได้ไว้เรียกว่ามาตาภริยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนแม่ภรรยาแบบที่5มีความเคารพสามีมีความละอายใจทำตามความพอใจสามีคล้ายน้องสาวเคารพพี่ชายเรียกว่าภคินีภรรยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนน้องสาวภรรยาแบบที่6เมื่อเห็นหน้าสามีมีแต่ความยินดีคล้ายกับเพื่อนรักมาเยี่ยมที่บ้านรักษาชื่อเสียงวงตระกูลมีศีลมีวัดปฏิบัติต่อสามีดีเรียกว่าสักขีภริยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนเพื่อนภรรยาแบบที่7เป็นคนที่ไม่โกรธง่ายถึงจะถูกคุกคามก็ไม่มีจิตคิดประทุษร้ายอดกลั้นต่อสามีเอาใจสามีเก่งเรียกว่าทาสีภริยาเปรียบภรรยาเหมือนทาสสุชาดาเอ๋ยภรรยา3แบบแรกจะต้องตกนรกส่วนภรรยา4แบบหลังจะไปเกิดในเทวโลกชั้นนิมมานรดีภรรยา7แบบนี้เนี่ยเจ้าเป็นแบบไหนกัน
ข้าขอเป็นทาสีภริยาภรรยาเหมือนดั่งทาสเพคะ
เมื่อกลับถึงวัดเชตุวันเหล่าภิกษุพากันสนทนาถึงนางสุชาดาที่เป็นหญิงสะใภ้เจ้าอารมณ์แต่พอได้ฟังธรรมของพระพุทธองค์แล้วกลับเป็นหญิงเรียบร้อยไปได้พระพุทธเจ้าจึงได้อธิบายเรื่องที่เกิดขึ้นพร้อมตรัสอดีตนิทานมาเล่ากาลครั้งหนึ่งนานมาแล้วณเมืองพาราณสีพระเจ้าพรหมทัตได้สมรสกับมเหสีต่อมาก็มีพระราชโอรสตัวน้อยซึ่งเป็นที่โปรดปรานของพระเจ้าพรหมทัตเป็นอย่างมากมเหสีของพระเจ้าพรหมทัตเป็นหญิงดุร้ายชอบด่าบริวารข้าทาสอยู่เสมอ
พวกเจ้าดูแลพระโอรสกันอย่างไรเนี่ยถึงได้หกล้มได้ฉันจะลงโทษพวกเจ้าทุกคนทหารเอาตัวพวกนี้ไปลงทันเคี่ยนให้หลังลายเลย
เมื่อพระโอรสเจริญวัยก็ทรงเป็นห่วงพฤติกรรมของมารดาแต่ก็ไม่สามารถจะว่ากล่าวอะไรได้
ทำไมพวกเจ้าถึงทำงานไม่เรียบร้อยอย่างนี้ดูสิตรงนี้ยังมีฝุ่นหนาอยู่เลยปัดกวาดให้มันสะอาดหน่อยสินี่มันในวังนะไม่ใช่ชนบทบ้านของพวกเจ้าไปทำให้มันสะอาดไม่อย่างนั้นพวกเจ้าจะโดนเคี่ยนหลังลายแน่
เมื่อพระโอรสได้เรียนรู้วิชาต่างๆจากในวังหมดสิ้นแล้วก็เดินทางไปศึกษาศิลปะที่เมืองตักกศิลา
หม่อมฉันจะตั้งใจเรียนพระเจ้าค่ะเสด็จพ่อเสด็จแม่ดูแลตัวเองด้วยนะ
พวกเจ้าดูแลพระโอรสให้ดีๆล่ะอย่าให้รู้เชียวนะว่าเจ้าดูแลลูกของเราขาดตกบกพร่องน่ะ
เมื่อพระเจ้าพรหมทัตทรงสวรรคตพระโอรสก็ทรงขึ้นครองราชย์สืบมาพระองค์ทรงปกครองบ้านเมืองด้วยคุณธรรมแต่ด้านของมเหสีเองกลับมีนิสัยดุร้ายอย่างเดิมไม่เปลี่ยนแปลง
เอาออกไปให้หมดพวกเจ้านำสำรับมาให้ฉันทานดูสิของอย่างนี้ใครจะไปทานได้ ฉันแก่ขนาดนี้แล้วยังจะเอาของหวานๆมาให้อีกอยากให้ฉันตายไปนักหรือไงไม่ได้เรื่องได้ราวเลยสักคน
ไม่ว่าจะผ่านไปนานเท่าไหร่ท่านแม่ก็ยังมีนิสัยดุร้ายอย่างเดิมเราจะทำอย่างไรดีนะให้ท่านแม่เปลี่ยนไปได้
พระโอรสทรงครุ่นคิดถึงวิธีที่จะตักเตือนพระมารดาอยู่นานก็คิดไม่ได้สักทีจนมาวันหนึ่งพระองค์เสด็จไปอุทยานพร้อมกับมารดามีบริวารติดตามไปด้วยคณะใหญ่เดินไปสักพักพวกข้าทาสบริวารก็เอามือปิดหูเพราะรำคาญเสียงร้องของนกต้อยตีวิต
โอ๊ยรำคาญเจ้านกนี่จริงๆเลยร้องแสบแก้วหูไปหมด
นั่นนะสิน่าจะจับมาถอนขนซะให้หมดโอ้ยปวดแก้วหู
เจ้านกบ้านี่เสียงไม่เพราะแล้วยังร้องอยู่ได้ไม่รู้จักสำนึกรีบๆเดินกันเถอะลูกแม่อยู่แถวนี้ต่อไปได้อารมณ์เสียมากกว่านี้แน่ๆเลย
พอเดินต่อมาได้สักพักทั้งมเหสีและบริวารก็อารมณ์ดีขึ้นเพราะได้ยินเสียงร้องของนกดูว่าว
อย่างนี้สิค่อยอารมณ์ดีขึ้นมาหน่อยลมเย็นๆสบายๆเสียงนกร้องไพเราะอย่างกับเสียงเพลงฟังแล้วระรื่นหูดีจริงๆ
เสียงนกดูว่าวนี่เพราะจริงๆฟังเท่าไหร่ก็ไม่รู้สึกเบื่อยิ่งฟังก็ยิ่งเพราะ
นั่นนะสินะถ้าได้ฟังเสียงนกดูว่าวร้องทุกวันก็คงจะดีร้องต่ออีกนะเจ้านกอย่าเพิ่งหยุดร้องเสียล่ะ
เสียงร้องของนกทั้งสองชนิดนี้ทำให้พระโอรสทรงคิดถึงคำที่จะใช้ตักเตือนมารดาได้
ใช่สินะหากเรานำนกทั้งสองนี้มายกตัวอย่างเสด็จแม่จะน่าเปลี่ยนพฤติกรรมได้
ลูกเอ้ยฟังเสียงนกดูว่าวร้องสิไพเราะจริงๆเจ้าชอบไหมล่ะ
ชอบพะยะค่ะเสด็จแม่ดูสินกดูว่าวสีดำตัวเนี้ยสีก็ไม่สวยแถมลายพ้อยไปทั้งตัวแต่ที่น่าแปลกที่มันกลายเป็นที่รักของสัตว์ทั้งหลายจำนวนมากแม้แต่พวกเราที่เป็นมนุษย์เองก็ยังชอบเลยนะแต่นกต้อยตีวิตที่เราเห็นตะกี้สีสันสวยงามน่ารักแต่กลับร้องเสียงแสบแก้วหูไม่เห็นจะมีใครชอบมันสักคนธรรมดาสัตว์ทั้งหลายที่สมบูรณ์วรรณะมีเสียงอันไพเราะน่ารักน่าชมแต่พูดจาหยาบกระด้างย่อมไม่เป็นที่รักของใครๆทั้งในโลกนี้และโลกหน้าพระองค์ก็ได้เห็นมิใช่หรือว่านกดูว่าวสีดำตัวนี้ไม่น่ารักเลยแต่กลับเป็นที่รักของสัตว์อื่นๆเพราะเสียงร้องด้วยเสียงอันไพเราะเพราะฉะนั้นบุคคลควรพูดคำอันสละสลวยคิดก่อนพูดพอประมาณไม่ฟุ้งซ่านถ้อยคำของผู้ที่แสดงอัดเป็นธรรมเป็นถ้อยคำไพเราะเป็นถ้อยคำที่เป็นภาษิต
จริงอย่างที่เจ้าพูดแม่เป็นถึงมเหสีเป็นมารดาของเจ้าแท้ๆกลับคิดไม่ได้ที่ผ่านมาแม่ก็เป็นเหมือนนกต้อยตีวิตนั่นแหละจากนี้ไปแม่จะเปลี่ยนตัวเองเสียใหม่ขอบใจเจ้ามากนะที่เตือนแม่ให้ได้สติ
พระเจ้าค่ะลูกดีใจที่เสด็จแม่คิดได้จากนี้ไปทั้งบ่าวทั้งไพร่และราษฎรก็คงรักและเทิดทูนเสด็จแม่มากขึ้นแน่ๆพะยะค่ะ
พระมเหสีในครั้งนั้นได้กำเนิดเป็นนางสุชาดาพระโอรสเสวยพระชาติเป็นพระสัมมาสัมพุทธเจ้า
Early Buddhist history is a popular subject for many intellectual researchers. Here is the most Ajahn Punathammo, who is an expert on the subject, here to present the second part of his talk on the subject.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So I'm going to talk about the first and second councils, and we'll begin the story at the time of the Buddha's parinibbana. That's what we refer to the passing of a Buddha, what for an ordinary person we would call his death. For a Buddha, we say Parinibbana. And he entered Parinibbana at Kusinara. And at that time, there were many signs and wonders, one of which was that the Devas of Tawatingsa showered the site with blossoms from the Parichataka tree. And these were very beautiful, large flowers that are not found anywhere on earth. So a few days later, Mahakassapa, one of the Buddha's great disciples, was walking on the road with a large company of bhikkhus when they saw a naked ascetic coming the other way carrying one of these blossoms. And Mahakassapa recognized this was not a flower of the earth and that it came from Tawatingsa heaven. And he asked the ascetic, "Where did you get this flower?" And the ascetic told them about the Buddha's Parinibbana. And immediately upon hearing this, all those bhikkhus in the company who were not yet fully awakened became distraught and cried aloud and wept and in grief. And all those bhikkhus who were already arahants, they merely nodded their heads and said, "So it is, so it is, so the master always said, that which is born is subject to death." But there was one bhikkhu named Subhadda who said, "Don't be upset. We're well rid of this great samana always telling us what we can do and what we can't do. Now we can do whatever we like." So immediately there was trouble in the Sangha. Mahakassapa knew this had to be brought under control right away, and he decided then and there they needed to hold a council of the bhikkhus after the master's death to formulate the Dhamma and the Vinaya and agree on the teachings. The backstory of this Subhadda is that when he was a young monk, one of his relatives wanted to make a meal offering to the Buddha and the Sangha. And while they were preparing it, Subhadda went around bossing the people in the kitchen and ordering things, do this, do that, which a monk is not supposed to do. He's not supposed to be organizing a meal offering. And then the Buddha refused to accept the offering, and this offended and upset Subhadda, and he always had a grudge against the Buddha. So I think we've all met people like this. In any case, this was the first sign of trouble after the passing of the Buddha. And Kassapa took it upon himself to organize the meeting of the bhikkhus. And the idea was that they would gather together 500 arahant bhikkhus at Rajagaha and hold an assembly over the rains retreat. And they would put the word out, no other bhikkhus other than those 500 were to be allowed to spend the rains at Rajagaha. And the reason for this is simple. It's because the council was considered a Sangha Kama, an act of the Sangha. And according to the Vinaya rules for the performance of a Sangha Kama, all the monks in residence at that place must attend. And if there's anyone in that place, any bhikkhu in that place who's not attending, then it invalidates the Sangha Kama. So to keep things proper and under control, they decided 500 arahants and nobody else. But there was a problem right away because the Buddha's attendant Ananda, who had a flawless memory, had the best recollection of all the teachings of the Buddha. but he was not yet an arahant. So they invited him anyway, and they spent the first month preparing the grounds and the facilities for this great assembly. And Ananda spent the month in meditation to try and finish the task. And it said that at the very last day before the council was to begin, Ananda was going to spend the whole night in walking meditation to try and finish his practice. And at the end, with a sense of giving up, he went to lie down on his mat, and from the sitting posture to the lying posture, he went through 3 stages of awakening, became a once returner, a non-returner, and an arahant. And this story, this detail is often used in as a teaching parable in teaching meditation, because he was able to liberate his mind when he gave up this goal-oriented attitude. He was striving, but he was striving with a mind with an agenda. And then it was only when he gave that up. And the other point is that he attained these states neither sitting, nor walking, nor standing, nor lying, but while changing postures. I've heard traditional Burmese Vipassana teachers use this as to emphasize the importance of being mindful while changing postures. Pay attention when you're sitting down or standing up, because Ananda attained 3 stages of awakening while changing postures. So Ananda attended the council as an arahant, and the commentary adds colorful detail or a miraculous detail to the account to leave no doubt that he had attained arahantship. First, he entered the hall levitating. He floated into the hall, into his seat. And then a dewa from the Sudawasa, the pure lands, the pure abodes where anagamis go, manifested in front of the assembly and declared, Ananda has laid down the burden, Ananda has finished the path. So there were 2 monks who were essential in this assembly. The other one, besides Ananda, was Upali. And Upali was the master of Vinaya. And he was the one who best remembered and had studied all the Buddha's pronouncements on Vinaya. So he rehearsed, as they say, rehearsed the Vinaya. And they went through the rules of the Patimokkha one by one, and he was questioned, what are the first class of rules? They are the parajika, the rules of expulsion. And what is the first parajika? That's the parajika of having intercourse, sexual intercourse. And when did the Blessed One lay down this rule? And then he tells the story. So they rehearsed right through the entire Vinaya. And then it was Ananda's turn to go through the entire Sutta Pitaka. And it said that the whole assembly took 7 months. And most of the suttas in the Sutta Pitaka, they begin with the phrase, Ewang me sutang, thus have I heard. Because the wording is exactly as spoken by Ananda at the first council. He began by saying, thus have I heard. At that time, the Blessed One was in Vesali and so on and so forth. So this was and the Abhidhamma Pitaka was not rehearsed at the first council. That came later. But the 2 Pitakas, the Vinaya and Sutta, were considered to be fixed and determined at this time, immediately after the Buddha's death. There was also some other business transacted by this council. The first and most important was that it was brought up that the Buddha had declared to Ananda, after my passing, Ananda, the bhikkhus may, if they wish, dispense with the lesser and minor rules. So then Ananda was asked, did you ask the Blessed One which were the lesser and minor rules? And Ananda had to admit he neglected to ask for clarification. And the assembly debated for some time what they should call the lesser and minor rules, and they couldn't come to a consensus. So it was agreed in the end, we'll keep the rules exactly as they are. We won't dismiss any of them. Because if they were to arbitrarily dismiss some Vinaya rules at that point, the fear was that lay people would say, oh, these monks are getting lax. As soon as the master's gone, they loosen up the discipline. So the decision was made there and then to keep the Vinaya. And the Vinaya is considered to be fixed, that there is no body within Theravada Buddhism that has the authority to change the Vinaya. The Vinaya remains as laid down by the Buddha until the coming of the next Buddha. There's no power on earth that can alter or amend the Vinaya rules. There was also what's sometimes called the trial of Ananda. He was criticized on several points and he defended himself. The first one was this, that he had neglected to ask the Buddha what was the minor and lesser rules, and he admitted the fault that it did not occur to him to ask. There were 5 of these points altogether. The second one was that he had disrespected, according to some, the accusation was he had disrespected the Buddha by putting his foot on the Buddha's robe. And it turns out he was repairing the robe, sewing it, and he had no one to help him, so he stretched out the cloth by holding it with his foot. And he said, I meant no disrespect by this act, but I will confess my fault is seen as such. The third offense was that after the Buddha died, he let the women pay respects to the body first before the bhikkhus, which was a breach of etiquette. And one of the points raised was that the women defiled the Buddha's body with their tears. So it seems harsh, but this was also raised in the assembly, and Ananda said he saw no fault in it. He wanted to let them have their chance because he didn't see they would get a chance later, and he didn't think it was a fault, but he will confess it. The fourth one was that he neglected to ask the Buddha to remain alive for a kappa. Now, this is a very controversial episode. Shortly before the Buddha's parinibbana, he had said to Ananda that the Tathagata may, if he wishes, remain in existence for a full kappa. And Mara invaded Ananda's mind and confused him with visions. So he didn't think, he was befuddled, and he didn't think to ask, to beseech the Buddha to remain. Now the controversy surrounds what is the meaning of a kappa in this case. The ordinary meaning of a kappa would mean the age of a world system. Like, in this case, it would mean that the Buddha could remain in existence until the end of the world. But that seems actually unlikely. It would seem to violate many broader principles of Dhamma that would undermine the view of impermanence. And it would mean that when the next Buddha come, there would be 2 Buddhas in existence at once, which is also said to be impossible. So how it's generally interpreted, as the commentary interprets it, is that by a kappa he meant a full human lifespan, which was thought to be 100 years. So it's probable what the Buddha was saying, he could have lived another 20 years. But in any case, Ananda did not ask him to, so he didn't do it. And the fifth point that they raised was that at the time of the establishment of the Bhikkhuni order, the order of nuns, it was Ananda's intervention that persuaded the Buddha to establish that order. And the prediction was that if the order of nuns was established, then the teaching of the Buddha would only survive 500 years. If it was not established, it would survive 1,000 years. This is also a controversial passage, and there has been some scholarship that indicates that it may have been a later imposition, a later interpolation into the text. The language used in that passage, it's in the, I believe it's in the Chulawaga, it's in one of the Vinaya books. The language used is that if the order of nuns is established, the Sadhamma will last only 500 years. Sadhamma means good Dhamma or right teaching. And this is a word or a phrase that's extremely rare or non-existent elsewhere in the canon. But where it does show up is in later literature, after the Mahayana had begun, and there were controversies between the Theravada and the Mahayana. The Mahayana criticized the older schools as Hinayana. The Theravada and the other traditional schools called themselves the Sadhamma, and the Mahayana was the Miccha Dhamma, or the wrong Dhamma. So it was, and also the time frame of 500 years is suspicious, because that would be about the time Mahayana began. In any case, it's an oddity, and certainly the Buddha's teaching has survived much longer than 500 years. So this little passage is called the Trial of Ananda. And finally, when the council wrapped up, we have another sign of trouble to come, in that a bhikkhu named Purana arrived with a large company of his followers after the council was finished, and other bhikkhus were allowed into Rajagaha. He arrived and they told him what they had done. And he said, "That's good, that's well done. May it be so, but as for me and my followers, we will remember the teaching as we heard it." So already there were some bhikkhus who were not accepting the canon as established at the first council. But in general, the canon as fixed by the first council has remained fixed, and all the subsequent schools of Buddhism look back to the first council as the establishment of the canon. Then we move on 100 years later, and in the 100 years, the Buddhist teaching had spread widely in India and was spreading out beyond the bounds of the Middle Country. The Middle Country, or the Majjhima Padesa, is the Ganges Valley. And this is the core of the Buddhist heartland. But the teaching was now spreading to the east and west and south across India. And in those days, of course, there was not easy transportation or communication between distant places. So there was a natural tendency for the different groups of bhikkhus to begin drifting apart in their practice. And a crisis moment arrived about 100 years after the Buddha in Vesali, when there was a group of monks at Vesali that had come to practice a modified Vinaya. They had loosened up or modified several of the rules. And a visiting monk from elsewhere named Yasa, who was more traditionally minded, he went to stay at one of their monasteries. And after the puja and the Dhamma talk, he was shocked to see that the monks put out a brass bowl and the lay people put coins in the bowl. And then the monks, after the lay people left, the monks divided up the coins amongst themselves. So he said, "Sir, don't you know it's against the Vinaya for monks to have coined money, to accept gold and silver?" And they said, "Oh, we have an allowance for receiving money." And it turns out they had these 10 allowances that they'd made up. And these were the points of controversy, the 10 allowances. And they were, number one, what's called the salt horn allowance. The monks are not, by the Vinaya, they're not allowed to store food, keep food from day to day, but they would keep salt in a horn to flavor their food, and made an allowance for that. The second one they called the 2 finger breadths allowance. The rule for the monks eating is that they have to finish eating before noon. And you have to remember this was a time before mechanical clocks. So noon was defined as when the shadow of the sun passed the midpoint. And a simple way of doing it is to put a stick in the ground and see when the shadow moves from the west to the east of the stick. But these monks were saying that they could continue eating until the shadow had gone 2 finger breadths beyond the midpoint. The third point was called among the villages. It said if after the meal, if the monks were still hungry, they could go out and beg for more food in the village, which is also a violation of the Vinaya. The fourth was called the residences, and this referred to a Sangakama. When a Sangakama, such as the reciting of the Patimokkha, happens, it's invalidated if all the monks in a monastery are not present. And this allowance said that there could be separate Sangakamas for different groups of monks within a monastery. They didn't have to all be united. The fifth rule is kind of similar. It said that if any monk did not attend the Sangakama, he could simply be told about it afterwards. It's actually very important in the Vinaya that when the Sangakama occurs, that every monk be present. There was a way in which probably still happens in really large monasteries where it's hard to keep count of is everybody here. They would have a specially marked stick, like a decorative thing made out of ivory or wood. And there would be a pegboard at the hall, and when you came in, you put your stick in the hole in the pegboard, and they could see if it was filled, if all the monks were attending. And they also had a 6th point that they would, rather than follow the Vinaya as laid down by the Buddha, they would allow their own customs to take precedent. And they allowed unchurned buttermilk as an additional allowable in the afternoon. They allowed the drinking of unfermented toddy. So I take this to be something like a mildly alcoholic beer or wine. Toddy was a fermented alcoholic drink. So they would allow the monks to have that as a drink if it wasn't fully fermented. They allowed a sitting cloth without a border. And the 10th point was they allowed the monks to receive gold and silver. So this is really the one of the 10 that's the most important and that precipitated the crisis. So first, this visiting monk Yasa accused them of breaking the Vinaya, and there was a back and forth. They suspended him, and then he criticized them publicly, and it stayed for a while within the controversy within Vesely, and the lay people were taking the side of this other monk Yasa. So the bhikkhus of Vasily drove him away. And then there followed a period when both factions were traveling around India seeking adherents. They were going to have a big council and settle the matter of the Vinaya. And there was a lot of politicking, back and forth, getting support, bringing groups of monks together. And they assembled a very large council, and it was not able to come to any agreement for a long time. There was a lot of bitter back and forth, and it was decided by the larger group, in the interest of harmony, will appoint like a jury, a council of 4 monks from each side to come to a decision, and we'll all accept the decision that they make. We can't decide in a large group. And these 8 monks took some time to debate, and they ended up favoring the position of Yasa to stay with the original Vinaya and not allow these 10 allowances. And the other monks who were actually in the majority, the larger group, wanted the laxer interpretation, but they accepted it begrudgingly. But this didn't make an end of the problem. The council, in the long run, was a failure. It succeeded in the short term in getting an agreement to keep the Vinaya intact, but it failed in the larger project of getting all the monks together in harmony, because there was, from then on, there was a division in the Sangha, and it became formalized 37 years later, when there was a special council at Pataliputra, and this was the first official schism or separation of the Sangha occurred at this council. And this was, although it had its roots in the Vinaya controversy of the Second Council, it was called on points of Dhamma. There was a character called Mahadeva who propounded 5 points that had the consequence of reducing the status of an arahant. And there are some different versions of this. This whole episode is rather murky in the sources. There are different versions, which one would expect from such a controversial moment. The 5 points can be found not under this name, but they're in the Katawatu, in the very first chapter of the Katawatu, the Book of Debates. The first debates they bring up all revolve around these 5 points. The first point is sometimes stated as an arahant can do wrong or can commit bad karma, which goes against the traditional teaching. But the way it's expressed in the Katawatu and in some other sources is more specific. It says that an arahant can have a emission of semen, which again would be impossible for one one without lust. In the Katawatu, part of the debate says, well, where if one of the heretics who's saying that an arahant can have an emission says, well, where does the semen come from if the arahant doesn't have lust? And he says, Mara brings it. The second point of Mahadeva was that an arahant may not even know that he is an arahant. The third point is that an arahant may have doubts about the doctrine. So it's the traditional view. The arahant has a completely purified view, and he would not have any doubts or uncertainties about things like the Four Noble Truths and the dependent origination, the three characteristics, and so on. These are fully penetrated by his mind. But he's not considered to be omniscient, and the example is given that he may not know the name of a man or a woman. He may not know the shortest route to a town, or these sort of mundane worldly matters. Doesn't know all these sorts of things. And the argument given in the Katawatu by the other side is that because he doesn't know these things, he may be confused about more important things. The fourth point is also stated in various places in different ways. It's sometimes phrased as he needs a teacher, or he's subject to teaching. And the way it's stated in the Katawatu is perhaps more direct and to the point. It says that an arahant can fall away, meaning he can stop being an arahant. He can be an arahant and then lose it. And the fifth one is odd. It said that, and again, it's hard to pin down what it actually originally meant, but it said that in one version that the attainment of arahantship is accompanied by a verbal exclamation. And the debate in the Katawatu revolves around whether one in jhana can speak. So these are the 5 points of Mahadeva, and we don't need to get bogged down in the details, but the point was to reduce the status of the arahant as a perfected being. Now, this Mahadeva is a very curious character and difficult to pin down. There are a number of slightly varying accounts that survive only in Tibetan or Chinese translations. He doesn't seem to occur at all in the Pali sources. And the sources that we do have make him out to be a very wicked person. And his biography usually includes, before he became a monk, many horrendous deeds, beginning with having sexual relations with his mother, then killing his father, then later killing his mother as well, and killing some other people, including Arahant Bhikkhu. So this would have meant, if these stories are true, that would have meant that he committed 3 of the 5 heinous kamas, so he could not possibly attain enlightenment in this lifetime. So one can suspect that these stories may have been an attempt to later to really blacken his character. But the curious thing is that these stories are found in Mahayana sources, and he is in a way a precursor of Mahayana, because this Mahadeva and his 5 points, and the council that was called at Pataliputra, was considered to be the first split, the first formal split of the Sangha into schools. The majority of the council supported the 5 points, but a large faction refused to support them, and the two groups were unreconciled at the end of the council. The group that supported the 5 points were called the Mahasamgikas, which means the large group. It's sort of like the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, the big group or the majority. They call themselves that. We're the big group, the Mahasangha, Mahasamgikas. And the other group called the Staviravadas. And Staviravada is a Sanskrit version of the same name as Theravada. It means the school of the elders. So the split was between the big group and the traditionalists, or we're not going with the new doctrine, we're staying put. That's the Viravada, the elders. In a short while, the Mahasamgikas began developing their doctrines further, and they came up with various proposals and ideas relating to the nature of a Buddha, amongst other things. They said that the material body, power, and longevity of the Buddha is without limit. The Buddha does not sleep or dream. The Buddha answers questions without thinking. And curiously, the Buddha never says a word because they are always in samadhi, but beings thinking that they utter words jump for joy. In a single moment of thought, Buddhas comprehend all Dhammas. Buddhas remain in all directions. There are Buddhas everywhere in the 4 directions. So we can see here in the Mahasamgikas, there was a dual agenda going on to downgrade the status of the Arahant and to increase to the level of some kind of godlike figure, the status of a Buddha, to separate the gulf between an Arahant and a Buddha greatly increased. And these ideas of a Buddha being so utterly transcendent without any connection to the human form precedes the ideas in Mahayana. It's a precursor idea to what we see in Mahayana. And the Mahasamgikas are considered to have eventually led to various other schools out of which the Mahayana emerged. And the Staviravada became also split into various groups, including the Theravada, which is now the only surviving original school from those days. But altogether there were traditionally considered to be 18 schools in short order that divided and split from this initial break between the Staviravadas and the Mahasamgikas. So to recapitulate the main points here, we began with the first council, which occurred immediately after the Buddha's death, in which the canon was fixed. We have a second council 100 years later that was called on points of Vinaya, and although it decided in favor of keeping the original Vinaya, there was a dissatisfied large number of monks who wanted the more lenient Vinaya, that eventually these other monks, the non-compliant monks, became followers of this Mahadeva and his 5 points, and at a council called 37 years later, established the Mahasamgikas as the first kind of breakaway division in the Buddhist sasana and the emergence of new doctrines.
洗进来，呼出去，洗进来，呼出去，好似盛开一朵年华，我清凉如一滴露，一路高山，屹立不移，像大地一般问候，我自在。吸进来，呼出去，吸进来，呼出去，我是精髓，翻找着什么是真，什么是实，在我觉得心里深处，空间满溢在其中，我自在，我放下，我自在。
That's all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the program, and thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.